And he goes on to describe in an extremely poignant and emotional letter that we have finally escaped this horrible cataclysm, and we hope to tell you more about what happened to us in future letters, but he does talk about that I was evacuated, we were in a crossfire and awful things. And way after the war, years after, the daughter of this uncle found all of these letters in a bureau when her parents died. She gave them to me. And these letters stimulated me, and when I was planning to retire, I had decided to write a book about what I went through for my... So I wrote this book, and I had it published in 2004, and the title of it is the first few words of that letter: "They are still alive." Every time I say those words, I get chills. And on the front cover are my father, my mother, and me at the age of, must be 8 or 9. And in the back, what I look like today, and the flag I mentioned before. Now, my mother's two sisters were able to escape to Cuba. I got my mother's parents, my father's parents. One of my mother's sisters had stayed behind to take care of the parents, and my father's brother and sister. We didn't know what had happened to them. Well, we found out after the war. My mother wanted to go to Belgium, to the home, as soon as possible. And we did. And my father had found out that his father had been shot in the street in front of their home in Antwerp, Belgium.
He didn't want to go back to Belgium.
Yeah, right. His mother, my father's mother, was deported to Auschwitz, the famous concentration camp where she was killed in a gas chamber. My father's sister and her husband had gone to France also, but they were arrested, and eventually the same thing happened to them in Auschwitz. Many other relatives in the family, that same thing happened to, and I've dedicated the book to these people who did not survive. My mother's parents, luckily, were saved as elderly Belgian Jews by the Queen of Belgium. My father's parents were not Belgians. They had never changed their nationality of Poland. But my mother's parents were sheltered by the Queen of Belgium, and they survived. My mother's other sister, who was taking care of them at the time, her husband was deported and killed. And so when parents went to live under the shelter of the Queen in an old age home, she decided to work for the Belgian government. And you know what she became? She became a spy for Belgium. And she had agents that she governed and told what to do, and she has letters, and I have all of these letters too. Maybe someday I'll write a book about that, but she became a master spy against the Germans. Finally, several years later, the war ended in 1945. The famous movie picture of Charles de Gaulle and the French army walking down the Champs-Élysées, the main street in Paris. My father took me to that parade, and I'm standing next to him on the curbside, and the famous French general Charles de Gaulle, who was the leader of the Free French, he marched down the center of the avenue, and I was that close to him. That was a big thrill. Anyway, finally, my mother wanted to go to the United States to be with her sisters, and they did not want to go to Belgium. So luckily, my father, who spoke all these languages, was interviewed by the United Nations, and he accepted a job, and in 1946, we came to the United States. And we lived on Long Island first, and in the Bronx, and I went to school, and part of the end of the book is about my life after the war. But the other thing I want to tell you is I was very traumatized by the war. Can you imagine being alone, separated from your parents, and seeing all these terrible things and killings, which I didn't even talk about? That when I came home, first of all, if my parents and I was, as I say, 9 years old, I think.
He had to break down.
If my parents wanted to go out on a Saturday night to visit family,
Yeah.
I could not be left alone. I'd become hysterical. So until I was almost 13 years old, a neighbor took care of me. I had to have a babysitter until I was almost 13. I mean, that's incredible. Also, if I'm walking in the street or in the home, if I'm in the house and I hear an ambulance siren, fire engines sirens, I'd freeze up because I